Saga of the Silver Wolf. Chapter 1, The Prophecy of the Wolf. The fire crackled in the great hall of the Silver Wolf clan, its flickering light casting long shadows across the carved wooden beams. The air was thick with the scent of meat and roasting meat, but Prince Eirik had no appetite. He sat at the long table beside his father, Jarl Vigdis, listening to the old seer's words with quiet unease. "The wolf stands at the edge of the abyss," the seer rasped, her voice like dry leaves in the wind. "Two paths lie before him, one of fire, one of ice. If he follows fire, he will lead his clan to glory. If he follows ice, he will betray his blood for love." A hush fell over the hall. The warriors shifted in their seats, exchanging wary glances. Eirik felt the weight of his father's gaze settle upon him. Jarl Vigdis was a man of war, a leader who had spent decades carving his name into the bones of his enemies. Betrayal was not a word he tolerated lightly. "What does this mean?" Vigdis growled. "Speak plainly, woman." The seer's cloudy eyes locked onto Eirik's. "A woman of the Raven clan will decide your fate, son of Vigdis. She is your doom, or your salvation." Murmurs rippled through the hall at the mention of the Raven clan. They were the Silver Wolf clan's fiercest rivals, a people just as strong, just as cunning, and just as ruthless. Their lands bordered the eastern fjords, and blood had been spilled between their clans for generations. Eirik met his father's eyes. There was no fear in them, only the cold steel of a warrior who had lived too long to believe in fate. "The Raven clan are nothing but carrion birds picking at the bones of the weak," Vigdis scoffed. "My son's fate is already written. He will lead our warriors into battle, not chase foolish prophecies." The seer said nothing more. She merely turned, disappearing into the darkness of the hall like a wisp of smoke. The next morning, the war horns sounded. Eirik stood at the prow of his longship, the cold wind biting his face as the Silver Wolf fleet cut through the icy waters. His fingers tightened around the hilt of his sword. The time for prophecy was over now, there was only war. They struck the Raven clan's village at dawn. The clash of steel rang through the air as the Silver Wolf warriors stormed the shore. The scent of burning wood mixed with the cries of the fallen. Eirik fought at the front, his blade finding its mark again and again. He had been raised for this, for the thrill of battle, for the glory of his clan. And yet, amidst the chaos, his gaze caught on something unexpected. A woman stood in the heart of the village, her long dark hair whipping in the wind. She wore a warrior's tunic, a blade gripped tightly in her hand. But it was not her defiance that stopped him, it was her eyes. They burned with the fire of the gods, fierce and unyielding. Before Eirik could move, she lunged at him. Their swords met with a ringing clash, and for the first time in his life, he found himself hesitating. A warrior of the Raven clan. The woman from the prophecy. His doom. Or his salvation. Chapter 2, A Captive's Defiance. The woman fought like a tempest, wild, relentless, and unyielding. Eirik barely had time to block her strikes before she came at him again, her blade flashing like lightning in the morning sun. Unlike the men he had slain that day, she did not fight with brute force alone, she was swift, her movements calculated, her rage honed to precision. Their swords clashed again, but this time, Eirik moved with purpose. He parried her next attack, forcing her back. "Who are you?" he demanded. She did not answer. Instead, she swung for his throat. Eirik barely dodged in time. He cursed under his breath. She wasn't just a warrior, she was a trained shield maiden. He feinted left, then drove his shoulder into her, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, but before she could recover, he struck the hilt of his sword against her wrist, sending her weapon clattering to the ground. With a swift motion, he grabbed her by the arm and twisted it behind her back. "Enough," he growled. She struggled against him, spitting in his face. "Kill me, Viking," she hissed. "I will not kneel." Eirik wiped the spit from his cheek, more amused than angered. She had spirit. Even defeated, She refused to yield. A group of his warriors approached, dragging prisoners with them. One of them, Eirik, his second in command, eyed the woman with interest. She fights like a demon. Who is she? Eirik turned her toward him, holding her firm. I asked you once. I will ask again, who are you? The woman lifted her chin, her dark eyes blazing with fury. Astrid, daughter of Jarl Håkon. The air between them shifted. A murmur ran through the Silver Wolf warriors. Eirik's grip on her arm tightened slightly. The daughter of the Raven clan's Jarl. A valuable prize, one that could end this war or make it bloodier. Eirik let out a low whistle. Odin's bones, Eirik. You've just captured the Raven clan's greatest treasure. Astrid yanked against his hold, her voice sharp. If you think my father will trade land or silver for me, you are mistaken. He will burn your ships and slit your throats before he bargains with wolves. Eirik studied her. There was no fear in her, only fire. He almost smiled. We shall see. The journey back to the Silver Wolf stronghold was long, made slower by the wounded and the captives. Astrid was bound at the wrists but walked upright, refusing any help or mercy. Eirik watched her from the corner of his eye as they boarded the longships. She did not cower like the other prisoners, nor did she weep. Instead, she stared at the horizon, jaw set, her mind already working to find an escape. Eirik nudged him as they pushed off from the shore. What will you do with her? Eirik ran a hand through his beard, watching Astrid's defiant stance. I do not know yet. His father would want her used as a bargaining tool, perhaps even executed to send a message to the Raven clan. But something in Eirik rebelled against the idea. Killing her would be easy. It would be expected. But it would also be wasteful. He had seen many warriors fall today, but none had fought with the fire that burned in Astrid. She was fierce, proud, unbreakable. And as much as he tried to push the thought away, he could not forget the words of the seer. A woman of the Raven clan will decide your fate. Was this what she had foreseen? As the longships cut through the icy waters, Eirik found himself watching Astrid more closely. She was his prisoner, his enemy, and yet, for the first time in his life, he wondered if fate had set him on a path he could not control. A path where loyalty and love would collide. Chapter 3, Whispers of Betrayal. The Silver Wolf stronghold rose like a fortress from the icy cliffs, its towering wooden walls reinforced with iron. Fires burned in great pits, sending columns of smoke into the sky. As the longships glided into the harbor, warriors lined the docks, waiting to greet their victorious kin. Astrid did not flinch as she was pulled roughly from the ship and pushed forward, her hands still bound. The other captives huddled together in fear, but she stood tall, her chin lifted, her eyes cold as the northern sea. Eirik walked ahead of her, his steps firm as he led his men toward the great hall. He could feel the weight of Astrid's stare on his back, sharp as a blade. She had not spoken a word to him since the battle, but he knew what she was thinking. She was searching for weakness, looking for a way to escape. Jarl Vigdis sat upon his throne at the head of the hall, his grey beard thick, his eyes hard with battle-worn wisdom. He watched as Eirik approached, his gaze flicking to Astrid. A fine victory, Vigdis rumbled, gripping the arm of his chair. And this? The daughter of the Raven clan's Jarl. Eirik nodded. Astrid, daughter of Jarl Håkon. She fought fiercely, but she is our prisoner now. Vigdis studied her with a predator's gaze. A valuable prize. I am no man's prize, Astrid spat, fire in her voice. Laughter rippled through the hall, but Vigdis did not smile. He leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. A warrior's spirit. I see why you took her alive. He turned his attention back to Eirik. What do you propose we do with her? Silence hung between them. Eirik knew the expected answer: use her to force Håkon's hand, or better yet, kill her to weaken the Raven clan's morale. But something in his chest tightened at the thought. She will remain here, under my watch, Eirik said at last. She is worth more alive than dead. A murmur spread through the hall. Vigdis narrowed his eyes. And if her father does not offer a ransom? Eirik met his gaze. Then she will learn the ways of the Silver Wolf clan. If she cannot be returned, she can be made useful. Astrid's head snapped toward him, her dark eyes flashing. You think to make me one of you? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I would rather die. Eirik smirked. Then you will be disappointed, for I do not plan to grant you that mercy. Vigdis watched them both for a long moment, then let out a low chuckle. Very well. She is yours to keep, your responsibility, your burden. He turned to one of the guards. Take her to the longhouse and see that she is secured. We will decide her fate in time. As the guards moved to seize her, Astrid did not resist, but her eyes locked onto Eirik's, burning with unspoken fury. That night, Eirik stood alone on the cliffs overlooking the sea, the wind howling around him. The seer's words echoed in his mind. A woman of the Raven clan will decide your fate. A presence approached from behind. He turned to see Eirik, his most trusted friend, watching him with wary eyes. You made a bold choice today, Eirik said. Eirik exhaled, crossing his arms. I did what I thought was right. Eirik scoffed. Did you? Or are you already too close to her? Eirik frowned. I barely know her. You don't need to. Eirik's voice lowered. The men are talking, Eirik. They think she is dangerous, and not just because of her father. They think you are making a mistake. Eirik turned to fully face him. And what do you think? Eirik hesitated, then sighed. I think she would rather slit your throat than thank you for sparing her life. He met Eirik's gaze. And I think your father is watching. He gave you responsibility over her, but he will not tolerate weakness. Eirik clenched his jaw. He knew his father too well. Vigdis was a man who saw sentiment as a flaw, and a leader who showed mercy could be seen as weak. But Eirik did not feel weak. He felt something else entirely, something unsettling, something dangerous. Fate had placed Astrid in his hands. Now, he had to decide what to do with her. Chapter 4, The Escape and the Chase. Astrid paced the length of the longhouse, her wrists still raw from the ropes that had bound her. Though they had been removed, the weight of captivity pressed down on her like iron shackles. The room was small but sturdy, heavy wooden walls, a single window too narrow for escape, and a thick door barred from the outside. She had been in enemy hands for less than a day, but already, she was planning her way out. A lone guard stood outside, his shadow stretching long in the torchlight. She had observed his movements, his posture, the way his hand rested lazily on the hilt of his sword. He was comfortable, convinced that she, a mere prisoner, was no threat. A mistake. She had grown up among warriors, trained alongside men who underestimated her. And every time, she had proven them wrong. Astrid waited until the night deepened, until the voices in the great hall quieted and the sounds of revelry gave way to the hush of sleep. Then, she moved. She ripped a wooden peg from the frame of the bed, its end sharpened just enough to be useful. Slowly, carefully, she worked at the hinges of the window, her breath slow and measured. The wood creaked, but she did not stop. Moments stretched into an eternity, and then finally the hinge gave way. The window shifted just enough for her to pry it open. She exhaled, steadying herself. Then she slipped through. The cold night air stung her skin as she landed lightly in the snow. She crouched, listening. The stronghold was still, save for the distant crackle of torches and the occasional sound of boots against stone. She moved like a shadow, sticking close to the longhouses as she made her way toward the outer wall. The guards patrolled in a steady rhythm, their attention mostly fixed on the gates. That was her advantage. They were watching for an attack from the outside, not an escape from within. A stable stood near the palisade, its wooden beams worn with age. If she could reach it, she could steal a horse and be gone before they realized what had happened. Her heart pounded. Almost there. But as she reached for the door, a voice cut through the silence. "You're quicker than I expected." Astrid spun, her stolen weapon raised. Eirik stood a few paces away, arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't wearing his armor, only a simple tunic and fur-lined cloak, but there was no mistaking the steel in his gaze. She didn't hesitate. She lunged. Eirik dodged, sidestepping her attack with frustrating ease. He caught her wrist before she could strike again, twisting the makeshift weapon from her grip and pulling her flush against him. "You truly think I wouldn't be watching?" His voice was low, edged with something she couldn't quite place. Amusement? Admiration? She glared up at him, refusing to struggle. "Are you going to kill me now, Viking?" Eirik's grip tightened, but there was no malice in it. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it this far." Astrid clenched her jaw. "Then let me go." He exhaled sharply, his breath warm against the cold night air. "If I do, you'll run straight to your father. And he will come for you with an army." She lifted her chin. "And what of it? Is that not what your people want? War?" Something flickered in his expression, something she couldn't quite decipher. "Not like this." For a moment, they stood in silence, the wind howling around them. Then, reluctantly, Eirik loosened his hold. "I won't lock you away like an animal," he said. "But if you try to escape again, I will not be so forgiving." Astrid met his gaze, searching for weakness, for deceit. She found none. Slowly, she stepped back. "You are a fool, Viking," she murmured. "You cannot keep me forever." Eirik smirked, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see." Then, without another word, he turned and led her back toward the longhouse, where the door would close behind her once more. But this was not over. Not yet. Chapter 5, The Fire Within. Astrid sat by the small hearth in the longhouse, staring into the flames. Sleep would not come, not with the weight of her failure pressing against her chest. She had been so close, one step, one breath away from freedom, but Eirik had stopped her. She clenched her fists. It was not just his strength that had bested her, but his patience. He had known she would try to escape. He had waited for her. And now, she was back in the same place, trapped behind walls that felt more suffocating by the hour. But she was not broken. Not yet. The door creaked open. Heavy boots crossed the floor, stopping just a few feet from her. She did not need to look up to know who it was. "Eirik. You should rest," he said. "There will be no more chances to flee tonight." Astrid turned her gaze toward him, firelight dancing in her dark eyes. "And tomorrow?" A flicker of something passed across his face, something close to amusement, but with an edge of warning. "Tomorrow, we talk." She scoffed. "Talk? Do you expect me to become your tame little captive, to sit at your feet and beg for mercy?" Eirik exhaled, his jaw tightening. "No. I expect you to listen." Astrid stood, her chains clinking softly as she faced him. "Then speak, Viking. What grand words will you weave to convince me that I should accept my captivity?" For the first time, Eirik's expression darkened. "You are not the only one bound by fate, Astrid." She frowned at the weight in his voice. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "You think I wish to keep you here? That this is some game to me?" His voice lowered. "I have fought in enough battles to know where this path leads. If I send you back, your father will march on us with blood in his eyes. If I kill you, he will burn our lands to the ground." He took a step closer. "And if I let you go, my father will see me as weak." Astrid studied him, her breath shallow. She had expected arrogance, cruelty, even indifference, but not this. not a man caught in his own war. And what do you want? She asked, quieter this time. Eirik's gaze held hers, steady as stone. I want to find another way. She searched his face for lies, but found none. A long silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Then, Eirik sighed. Tomorrow, you will have a choice. Astrid lifted her chin. And if I refuse? His smirk returned, but it was laced with something else, something dangerous. Then you had better hope your next escape attempt is better than the last. With that, he turned and left, the door closing behind him with a dull thud. Astrid stared after him, her pulse racing. A choice. She did not yet know what that meant. But one thing was certain, this game between them was far from over. Chapter 6, Oaths and Betrayals. Morning came with a bitter wind, cutting through the stronghold like a blade. Astrid was led from the longhouse, her wrists now free of chains, though the weight of captivity still clung to her like an iron collar. Warriors paused their morning tasks to watch her, some with curiosity, others with distrust. Eirik waited in the center of the training yard, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. His presence commanded attention, even in stillness. She approached him warily. You spoke of a choice, she said. I am listening. Eirik motioned for her to follow, leading her through the stronghold and toward a small gathering hall. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. A heavy fur cloak rested on the back of a carved chair, she realized. This was his space, separate from his father's rule. He turned to face her. You have 3 paths before you, Astrid. She folded her arms, skeptical. And what are they? His jaw tightened slightly. First, you can remain a prisoner until my father decides your fate. He may trade you for silver, or he may use you as a pawn in this war. Either way, you will have no say in what happens next. She clenched her fists. That was not an option. The second. Eirik's gaze did not waver. You swear an oath to the Silver Wolf clan. Astrid's breath hitched. You mean betray my people? No, he said firmly. I mean survival. I mean forging a new path, one where you are no longer a prisoner, but an equal. You are a warrior, Astrid. You could stand among us as one. She stared at him, her heart pounding. Did he truly believe she would cast aside her blood, her father, her clan, and become one of them? She shook her head. And the third? Eirik hesitated, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The third option, he said slowly, is that I let you go. Astrid's pulse quickened. But, he continued, if I do, I will have to face my father's wrath. He will see it as weakness, and my position here, my very life, will be threatened. She frowned. Why would you risk that for me? Eirik exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Because I am tired of this war. Tired of bloodshed without reason. I do not want to see more men die for pride. And because he paused, his voice quieter now, the seer spoke of you. Astrid stiffened. What do you mean? Eirik met her gaze, the weight of prophecy hanging between them. She told me a woman of the Raven clan would decide my fate. A shiver ran down her spine. Fate. She had never put much faith in the words of seers, but here she stood, caught between the pull of duty and something far more uncertain. If she stayed, she risked betraying everything she had ever known. If she left, she might doom the only man who had treated her with something other than cruelty. 3 paths. 3 futures. And no easy answer. She swallowed hard. Give me time to decide. Eirik studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You have until nightfall. Astrid turned away, stepping back into the cold morning air. Her choice would shape the fate of 2 clans. And perhaps, her own heart as well.